Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about identifying non-chord tones. That's how the term is known in many parts of the world. In the UK, we call non-chord tones inessential notes, but it's exactly the same thing. In other words, they're notes that are used to embellish a piece of music, but they don't quite belong to the chords that are sounding at any given point. So what's the point of these things? Well, it's actually to make music a little bit more interesting, because if we went through a piece of music just going from one chord to the next, well, it would be all right, wouldn't it? But it's slightly boring. What I've got there is I've just given you the chord outline of the piece of music that's in front of us. What we're now going to see is, well, how does that rather sort of plain series of chords turn into a piece of music that sounds more interesting by using non-chord tones or inessential notes? So this is going to be useful to people who are playing music and interpreting music, just maybe to think a little bit more about which are the notes in the score that belong to the chords, which are the notes that don't, how does that maybe impact on the way that we convey all that to the listener. And if you're a composer thinking, well, you know, I've kind of got to the point where I can put a few chords down, but it just sounds a bit like what you've just heard. How do we make it sound a bit more interesting? So, okay, this is in a particular style that I've engineered this, but here's the same set of chords, but using these non-chord tones or inessential notes. You can hear the transformation, can't you? And it doesn't matter whether you're writing in this slightly classical style or a different style. It's a way of really breathing life into what otherwise is just a pretty boring set of chords. So what we're doing in this example is using two kinds of non-chord tones or inessential notes. Okay, now again, I'll try and deal with the terminology that happens both sides of the Atlantic, and you can take your pick. We've got in England things we call auxiliary notes, upper auxiliary notes and lower auxiliary notes, known in other parts of the world as neighbour tones. So what's an auxiliary note or a neighbour tone? Well, it's this. Say I take a chord of C major, so I've got C, E, G, and maybe in the melody I take one of those notes. So let's take C in the melody, so here's C. If I just go up a note to D and come back to C, well, this D has nothing to do with this chord of C. It sort of clashes with it, it's dissonant with it, but all I've done is to use a harmony note or a chord tone, C. I've gone up a note and I've come back. So this D is an upper auxiliary note or an upper neighbour tone. So guess what a lower auxiliary note is, or a lower neighbour tone? That's when I take the same example and I go C to B to C. So now I'm just going down a note and coming back again. So that B again, which sort of clashes with that chord, that's a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbour tone. Okay, now the other kind of non-chord tone that we're going to be thinking about in this video is what we call a passing note or a passing tone. So what's happening here? Well, let's stick with our chord of C major. So I've got C, E, G. And say the melody is going from one of those notes to another one of those notes. So say my melody is going from C to E, and I just decide to stick D in between. So I go C, D, E, or even the other way, E, D, C. So what's happening here? C belongs to that chord of C major, E belongs to the chord of C major, D doesn't. But it's just passing between C and E. So this is how a passing note or a passing tone works. you have to move by step from the note before and to the note after it. So in this case, C and E both belong to the chord, D doesn't, but I'm passing by step from C to E, or the other way around, from E to C. And you'll be amazed actually how much you can decorate a piece of music just using these two things. So let's turn our attention to the score in front of us, see if we can work out what's going on. Well, you have to kind of really understand what the chords are, and then you can see, well, what belongs to the chord, what doesn't belong to the chord. So this piece of music I've put together is in the key of C major. And I've tried to keep the chords reasonably straightforward, particularly at first. So when you look at the whole of this first bar, all of that is just a chord of C major. It's chord 1 in the key of C, or it's a chord of C. So basically the notes are C, E and G. So everything that belongs to C, E and G is a chord tone or a harmony note. So when you look at the beginning of this, you can think, oh, there are lots of notes here that actually belong to the chord. So that E belongs to the chord. So does this E. This C does. That C does. But you've got other notes in between that don't. These belong to the chord, but that one doesn't. This does. This doesn't. This does. So let's have a look and see which are the inessential notes or the non-chord tones, and see if we can work out what they are. So bear in mind, chord 1, C, E, G. So we said the first E in this right hand is a chord tone, a harmony note. This E here, sorry, this F, that second note, if you notice, we've come from E, we've gone up 1 to F, we've come back to E on the next note. So that F is an upper neighbor tone, an upper auxiliary note. Okay, the E that follows is part of the chord, so that's fine. This D at the end of the first bar, the end of the first measure, is nothing to do with this chord of C, C, E, G, and I've got D. Oh, so what's going on here? Well, I've got my C major chord and I've come from E. I'm going through D, that note I've just circled, and we're going on to C at the beginning of the next measure, the next bar. So this D I've just circled is a passing note or a passing tone because it's going by step between the E and the C. E, D, C. So you can see what's happening there. When we come to the next bar, the next measure, we're still using the same chord. The chord hasn't changed. We've got all this movement with quavers, with the eighth notes, but the chord is still the same. So in the second measure, the second bar, the first note in the right hand is a chord tone or a harmony note. But this B is a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbor tone. Now, how do I know that? Well, it's going from C down 1 to B, and it's coming back to C. So you see which notes in the right hand now are chord tones, notes that belong to that C, E, G chord, and which are the notes that don't belong, but we've now identified which ones are auxiliary notes or neighbor tones, which ones are passing notes or passing tones. The same is happening in the left hand. At the beginning in the left hand, notice I've got the left hand in the treble clef, by the way. We're starting with C and G in the left hand, so that belongs to the chord. But what about this F? That doesn't belong to the chord, but it's a passing note or a passing tone because it passes between G and E. So I've got G and then I'm going F, E. So that's a passing note or a passing tone. And because that's happening at the same time as one of these things in the other hand, we can call it a double passing note or a double passing tone. So I've got chord, that F in the right hand upper auxiliary note or upper neighbor tone, back to a chord tone, then double passing notes or passing tones. Then we're into the next bar. Okay, now again, the left hand on the second note, that D that I've just circled, doesn't belong to the chord, but it's just going down 1 from E. I'm going E, down 1, back to E. So it's a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbor tone. And again, you can see that that's happening in both hands. So we've got double lower auxiliary notes or double lower neighbor tone. So that's what's going on there. Okay, now if we now look at the next two measures, the next two bars, you might notice something. You might notice that we have a sequence. If I look at the right hand, the first two bars, the first two measures go. Oh, come to the third bar, the third measure, we're just doing the same thing one note higher. Except for a little change there, just to make for a little bit of variety. So if that's the same thing, well, probably the same things are going to work out, aren't they? Well, let's just check that out. First of all, what's this chord? Well, this is a chord 5, and it's 5 in first inversion. Now, chord 5 is G, B, D. If it's in first inversion, that's because B, the third of that chord, is the lowest sounding note. So we have B as the lowest sounding note. So it's 5 in first inversion. Now you'll either know this as 5B or you'll know it as 5 with a little 6. Okay, means exactly the same thing. Now then, what's interesting is in the right hand, the first note is F. Now, you're probably already thinking, well, hang on a minute, chord 5 is G, B, D. So where does F come in? Well, F makes this a 7th, doesn't it? So we've got a little bit of 5-7B or 5-7-6. And I've done this on purpose just to show how things don't always quite work out as you think. Because we heard this at the beginning, and now we hear the sequence, we think, it's all going to be exactly the same. Well, the thing is, if this first F is actually the 7th of a 5-7, well, then it's a chord tone. It's an essential note, belongs to the harmony. Okay, well, it did last time, so that's all right. So this next G must be an upper auxiliary note or an upper neighbor tone. But is it? Because G belongs to the chord, because F belongs to a 5-7, so does G. So in this case, it doesn't quite work out the same. So I've done this on purpose just to make the point that you might think you're looking at the same situation again, but are you? So you see what's happening there? That's a chord tone or a harmony note. So is this. So is this. However, when we come to this note at the end of the bar, the end of the measure, this E, that is a passing note or a passing tone because we're going F, stepping down to E, stepping down to D. F belongs to the chord, D belongs to the chord, E doesn't. So that's a passing note or a passing tone. But this time it's only a single one. At the end of the first bar, the first measure, we had a double one because the left hand was doing it as well. This time the left hand isn't, but the right hand is. So you see how things just kind of move around a little bit, even though the music looks as if it's the same kind of thing. When we go into the fourth bar, the fourth measure, well, the first D belongs to the chord because that's still on, but this E doesn't. Now, at the sort of same point in bar 2, in measure 2, we said, oh, that was a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbor tone. Well, this one is an upper auxiliary note or an upper neighbor tone. Just turned it round. So do you see how that works? D belongs to the chord 5, E is one above, and then we come back to D again. So interesting how you can have two measures or two bars, then use the same material in what we call sequence, to just move to a different pitch, but things don't always quite behave the same way. Some things do, some things don't. Okay, let's move on. What's happening next? Well, the harmony is going to get a bit more active. The speed of chord change is going to get faster now, what we call speeding up the harmonic rhythm, the rhythm in which the chords change. Now, what's happening here is we're going back in, this is now on the second line, we're going back to chord 1. So that's a C chord. I should have said, of course, that's a G7 chord up there. Anyway, we're back to a C chord here. And in the second half of this measure, or the second half of this bar, well, it really moves on to chord 1 again, the C chord again, in first inversion. So a 1B or a 1/6, if you know it that way. But all the notes of this bar, all the notes of this measure, all belong to the same chord. So it's that chord of C again, the C, E, G chord. So let's quickly see what belongs to that, what doesn't. Well, in the right hand, E belongs to it, F doesn't, G belongs to it, C doesn't. So the only odd one out is this F. And you can see that's going by step between E and G. E belongs to it, we're going up by step to G that belongs to the chord. F doesn't, so that is a passing note or a passing tone. The same thing happens in the left hand. We start with G and C, they both belong to the chord. D doesn't, E does. And again, that D in the left hand is a passing note or a passing tone. Again, both hands are using them at the same time. So it's a double passing note or a double passing tone. See how that works? Now, looking at the next part, this is another sort of hint of sequence, isn't it? If this bar we've just been looking at, bar 5, does this, we've taken the same pattern, we've gone up 4 notes. But we're leaping wider at the end of the bar. So we're thinking, well, it's the same kind of pattern, so what's going on here? But first of all, we need to know what the chords are. If you don't know what the chords are, then how do you know which notes belong to the chord and which notes don't? So always work out your chords first. Now, this is a chord 4 or a chord of F. But later in this bar, the chords are changing. We're going back to a chord 1 in first inversion, so a chord C. So now the harmonic rhythm is speeding up. The first 2 bars, the first 2 measures were 1 chord, the next pair of bars, next pair of measures were another chord. Then we have 1 chord for a single measure. Now we've got 2 chords going on in the same measure or the same bar. So these circles I'm drawing are just trying to help us see the harmonic rhythm, the speed at which the chords change. Okay, so if we look at this chord 4, this F chord, well, that's F, A, C. Well, both the left-hand notes belong to that. The A in the right hand does, but the B doesn't belong. So this B must be an inessential note, a non-chord tone. And when you look at what's happening, we've got A belongs to the chord, B next door, going on up to C. So the B is a passing note or a passing tone. Now I've included this because I want to make this point. It doesn't matter that the chord changes, because you might say, well, hang on a minute. A belongs to that F major chord, that chord 4. B, I kind of see why that might be a passing note or a passing tone. But when you get to C, the chord's changed. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Still works as a passing note or a passing tone. When we come to the second half of this measure, this bar, we've got back to a chord of C, so C, E, G. The right-hand note, C, C, both belong to that. The left-hand notes, E and G, both belong to it. So in this beat and the second half of this measure, all the notes we hear are chord tones or harmony notes. So there's nothing going on there that's an inessential note or a non-chord tone. Our next chord is going to happen in the first half of the next bar, the next measure. And this is a chord 2 in first inversion, otherwise known as a D minor chord. So let's have a look at that. The notes are D, F, A. Now if you look at that, the left hand, F and A, well, they both belong to the chord. The right hand, D and F, they both belong to the chord, don't they? So there's nothing going on here that's got anything to do with non-chord tones or inessential notes. They're all harmony notes, all essential notes, all chord tones, just to use all this different terminology. Okay, now let's go on to the second half of this measure and see what we think is going on here. Now, what's really happening here is that this is a chord 5, a dominant chord, it's a G chord, And when we look at that, the left hand, well, the G chord is G, B, D. In the left hand, we've got G and B. Fine, they both belong to the chord. In the right hand, the second note is D, so that does belong to the chord, that's fine, but E doesn't. So this E, let's have a think about what we think this E is about. Well, that E there is a passing note, a passing tone, because we had F, we came down one to E, we've gone down one again to D. So you can see why it's a passing note or a passing tone. A couple of things to say about this. First of all, it comes on the beat. You notice all these other passing notes or passing tones we've been talking about so far come between beats. They come on the second half of a beat. So they're called unaccented passing notes, unaccented auxiliary notes. This one comes on the beat. Because it comes on the beat, we call it an accented passing note or an accented passing tone. So that's a slight difference. The accented ones always feel a bit stronger. So this one will just feel a bit stronger than the others. So it's kind of worth noticing the difference between an accented passing note and an unaccented passing note or passing tone. Same for auxiliary notes or neighbour tones. The second thing I want to say about this, again, I've done this on purpose to explore some ambiguities. Some of you might be looking at the bit we've just circled and say, well, hang on a minute, why is it chord 5? Why couldn't it be chord 3 in first inversion? In other words, an E minor chord. So couldn't this be chord 3 in first inversion? Otherwise known as an E minor chord. Well, yes, it could. I mean, you could say that's an E minor chord, and then you could say the D that follows it is a passing note or a passing tone onto the C because it's going E, D, C. So why couldn't it be that? Technically, it could be. Also, technically, it perhaps isn't. And this is what this is about. We are coming to a cadence because this is the end of this extract, and the last two chords of a phrase will normally form a cadence. Now, we don't have a regular cadence that goes 3 to 1 or 3 in first inversion to 1, but we do have a cadence that goes 5 to 1. So this is why on balance it's better to regard this as a chord 5 with an accented passing note or an accented passing tone. So you see, I'm just trying to mop up some of these ambiguities through this example. Fine, we're almost there. In the last bar, the last measure, we've got chord 1 again, which is the C major chord. So just to remind us, that's C, E, G. Well, the right hand is just playing C, so that belongs to the chord, no trouble at all. In the left hand, we're starting on that E and G. So you could say, yeah, well, it does start on the first inversion because E's at the bottom. That's perfectly true. Then we've got these two notes, D and F, nothing to do with the chord of C. And then we move on to C and E, both notes belonging to the chord. So here we have a passing note and another one. So two passing notes or a passing tone. So these are double passing notes or double passing tones. So you see, in the space of 8 bars or 8 measures, we've got a real mix of chord tones and non-chord tones. Notes that belong to the chord, harmony notes, and inessential notes. But you see how we turned it from just having this kind of rather boring chord thing that you could kind of just keep going all day watching paint dry. It's not terribly exciting, is it? And we turn it into something that sounds, hopefully, a bit more engaging just by using these non-chord tones. So there we are. Hopefully you can see and hear how useful it is to know how these things actually function. Lots of people, as I say, able to kind of get the bare bones of something that could be fantastic, but just sounds a bit boring because they're not using these non-chord tones or inessential notes. Lots of people are using all sorts of notes that don't belong to the chord, and they just sound odd because they're not behaving in this way. So if you want it to integrate nicely into a melody and around a chord scheme, actually using these kind of non-chord tones or inessential notes in this way will probably make your piece of music sound a lot better. So if you're playing music, have a look at the pieces you're playing. Which are the essential notes, the harmony notes? Which are the non-chord tones, the inessential notes? How does that affect the way you want to play it and the way you want to shape a phrase and so on? And if you're writing, have a little think about how you balance the use of chord tones or essential notes with these non-chord tones or inessential notes, and how it generates a melody that really flows for you, how you can use them on their own, how you can use double notes that we've talked about. And it should really help to put some polish on your own composition. Well, I hope you found that video helpful. And if you did, go to www.mmcourses.co.uk, where you will discover all sorts of resources that we've put there for the benefit of developing the all-round musician. Now, we've got a fantastic international community called Maestros, and you may be interested in joining Maestros. All sorts of perks come with Maestros, and you'll read all about that as you click on Maestros. One perk just to highlight is that there are 3 levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. Nothing to do with ability at all. It's just levels of engagement, if you like. So level 1 is a kind of support level, comes with some perks, nice to sort of be included in what's going on. Level 2 gives you access to a monthly live stream where we can do stuff like this in much more detail, and I can spend an hour just teaching stuff, and there's a live chat running so you can ask any questions you want to about the topic we're doing or anything else about music, share thoughts and opinions with other members of the group, realize there are other people all over the world on the same journey as the one that you're on, because it can feel like a lonely trail sometimes, can't it? Just a great opportunity to ask all your questions and to absorb things that maybe you know well, but you could find out more about, or other areas of music you've never come across before. We try to cover a wide range of topics there. If you want to move on to the level 3 group, you have all the benefits of level 1 and level 2, but level 3 comes with an additional live stream, and this is much more kind of tailor-made to the individual, where you can submit recordings of your own performances, you can submit scores and recordings of your own compositions, your own harmony exercises, theory exercises, whatever you want to do, and I'll give you one-to-one feedback during that live stream. And we share all this material with each other so we can all learn from each other. It's very positive, very supportive group, which is marvelous. And people are just telling us all the time how much they really value being with others and having that one-to-one feedback and having that kind of mutual support. So if that's for you, have a look on Maestros. While you're on the homepage, click on courses, and you'll see that we've got a vast number of courses in theory, oral, analysis, harmony, you name it, we've got it there. So if there's support that you're wanting with your musical endeavors, you'll be sure to find things that are absolutely essential to the cause there. So have a click on there, have a scroll through, lots of information on each of those courses so you can decide if there's something there that's ideal for you. www.mmcourses.co.uk